A very warm welcome to my community. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, I'm pleased that you have joined us. Well, this week we begin with a heart full of gratitude. Special thanks to Sir David Seal and the folks at the People's Market for their continued interest and support of this series, My Community. Memory allows us to share stories, traditions, and experiences across generations. It's through memory that cultures pass down their histories, values, and knowledge, fostering connections and understanding among people. You might recall in 2022 when Mrs. Norma Odell became the first guest on My Community to present her memory as her special gift to the people of Barbados, the Barbadian diaspora, and anyone who follows this series. Mrs. Odell has set a precedent which is now being followed by Joseph Cummins, who celebrates his 70th birthday today, August the 13th, 2023. But before Joseph regales us with memories of Hillaby and surrounding areas, My Community wishes him a happy birthday, and of course we accept his 70th birthday gift to the people of Barbados.
First thing I want to draw attention to is the fact that there's a Hillaby St. Thomas and there's a Hillaby St. Andrew. Right now we're in Hillaby St. Andrew, but just down the road, rumor tells us that that is where Hillaby St. Thomas connects with St. Andrew. And folklore says that there's a particular house down the road, that half is in St. Thomas, half is in St. Andrew. Right. The second thing I also need to point out is that when we use the term Hillaby, we include Turnasol, St. Andrew, White Hill, St. Andrew, and Farmers, St. Thomas. So that's the geographical area, geographical spread when we talk about Hillaby. In the past, this area was built around plantations. We had Farmers Plantation, we had Dunscombe Plantation, we had Turnasol, and there's a smaller plantation, Clark's Plantation. All right. Now, what has happened is that COS has acquired virtually all of Farmers, virtually all of Dunscombe. All right. Turnasol, now, interesting project is going on there. I think there's governmental involvement. I don't know if it's the land for the landless, etc. But there's interesting agricultural projects are taking place down there with young people who have been given land and who are working that land to do some wonderful things. What has also happened is that you find that with the Clark smaller plantation now, that has been, landowners have changed and that persons in the area have bought land, and so they have now become landowners. Allied to the plantations is that we have some larger individual landowners, people like on the island. For example, this land here was formerly his. There's a whole plot, 5 lots on this belong to him. So, that has gone into individuals now who in fact have been able to acquire that land. We had Lushington Gill, we had Alfred Thompson, etc., who were landowners. And most of those properties now have gone to people from Hillaby, who are using them in the past. In the past, they were used to grow canes, but now they're being used to grow fruits and food crops.
Memory helps us navigate our environment by providing a mental map of places and a sense of time. It allows us to understand where we are going, and how things have changed over time.
Back in my history, you have to remember a butcher, a man named Shiggy Francis. In those days, we used to call a speculator. He has done himself a lot of people in this community. Because when people came to him who were short on cash, they would come to him and get a loan, and then that loan would go into when they sell the pig to him, etc., etc. So in times of difficulty, he was able to help them out. I can look back also to the discovery of natural gas in Turnasol, I think in the 1960s. That was a spurt economic activity. Many of the young persons in the area found work in that. But after the spurt came the sputter. And eventually that's just faded out. And all we had at one time was just a monitoring station up Greg's farm, where you would be able to detect the movement of natural gas throughout the country. But the interesting story came out of that, in that when the government wanted to send natural gas from up here, the landowners decided and took a stand and said, look, we are not allowing you to take natural gas and push it through our land, and the persons in Hillby not receive any. And so they took a stand, and that's how we were able, as Hillby people, to get natural gas, and you have to applaud them for that.
Memory is indeed the foundation of cognition, learning, personal growth, and cultural continuity, as it shapes our perceptions, our behaviors, and interactions with the world, and plays a very important role in our lives and society.
Now, the village shop, again, is another important aspect of this community. And if you go to Greg's Farm, you had Watson shop, you had Richard Hoyt shop, you had Benny Vaughn's, you could come right down. But the interesting thing about it is that out of all of those shops, only 2 have now survived. The Richard Hoyt shop, that shop is now being carried on by his son and other people, Robert. And then the person who's my neighbor, the Wars grocery shop, that is another shop that has survived the times. And that's one I could tell you a little bit about, because I remember Mr. Ward with his apron, his clipboard, writing down every purchase, how much every purchase cost. Not just writing it down. And there was nobody who could question that record. It was so perfect. All right, but you know, he provided lunch for those persons who were going to work, early agriculture workers, who might be going to various plantations, school children, who might be on their way to school, etc., and bread and cheese and all the other things that he provided for them, and that was an important part of what happened. But the legacy of the village shop still continues. The interesting thing is that there are younger persons now who are in fact running them. So we have people at Roy shop, etc. And then no farmers, you have a whole slew of shops there opening by younger persons. So that tradition has in fact continued. But what has made me really enthusiastic is the emergence of what they call some young business persons in this area. I can think of Uriah Watson, who started in Church Gap, who owns Wood Classic Inc., and who provided a lot of training for persons, young men in this area who wanted to work in the industry. He provided training. He's now moved to Lower Estate and established a larger complex. But he did a lot of work in terms of making sure that the young men in this area got exposure, and then many of them now who have gone on their own as small furniture workers, etc., who benefited from what he did. And then there's SH Furniture Limited up Mount Hillby. That's Simon and Harry, two brothers who run, again, a furniture manufacturing company, and have been able also to provide significant employment for persons in this area. And then there's an auto mechanic shop, Anderson Cumberbatch, and then there's a body workshop, Nigel Gemma. So those little things, those have been developed. And then along the way now, I'm seeing some dress designers coming out in this area. You can think of Katrina Braffett, right? And some people who are into computer graphics, etc. So I'm seeing a surge in business among young people who are recognizing that perhaps it's not always best to wait for somebody else to provide for you, but to make sure that you do that, you create those niches for yourself so that you're able to market your product, etc. I think the wonderful thing is that the people in the community make sure that they give them the support, the encouragement that they need by being customers. Right? And while I'm here, I need to go back to Tradition Society and draw attention to the fact that we also had a friendly society. Yeah, man, late Cameron Braffett with Church Gap. And that was our local bank, in the sense that persons who wanted money to do something would come to him, get a loan, so that when they get the savings, then when they get the payback and as the returns, in fact, he would take out that. So that it helped a lot of people in terms of persons who wanted to provide money for children to go to school, etc., buy groceries, etc. It really helped, and that was a major contributor to a lot of persons being able to make ends meet.
Memory preserves cultural heritage and traditions, ensuring the continuity of language, customs, and beliefs across generations.
Now, when I look back at the Hillby that I know, the first thing that comes to mind is the importance attached to education. And in this regard, I have to say a very special thanks to the Hillby Seventh-day Adventist Church, because they set up a church school in 1937, and then it was closed in 1994. Now, I do not know if that spread is continuous one or whether there was break, but we have to say a special thanks to them for making a significant contribution to education in this community. When we look at the public education, there was a time when residents in this area, the Hillby St. Andrew, had to go through Turner Hollows in order to reach St. Simons. So that was their trek. Go right, Turner Hollows and go to St. Simons. And they did that. The persons who lived at St. Thomas tended to go to Erie Court, which is Hillby Mix. So you had two schools operating basically, so St. Simons and Hillby Mix. Eventually, there was a school called Greg's Hill that was established in Greg's Farm. All right, that took a lot of the pressure off persons in Hillby St. Andrew who had to go down to St. Simons. So they now went to Greg's Hill, as we call it. Eventually, there was amalgamation of Hillby Mix and Greg's Hill to what you now have, Hillby Turner's Hall. That came out of that. So this is our, Hillby Turner's Hall is now our school. It's a school that we embrace as a community. It's a school that we take great pleasure and pride in. Right? But, you know, when they talk about education, what strikes me is the value that this community traditionally places in education. I remember when I passed common entrance and went to common mayor, there was great celebration in my community, what we used to call at the time Breadfruit Alley, because there were not too many people who had done that. And so there was this celebration. And I remember that individuals would pass me and stop me and inquire as to how I was doing, etc., because I had that kind of moral support. But then they found out that there were persons who were prepared to go beyond that, because I remember my sister who went to Modern High. At one point, she wanted to get some money in order to do CXCs. And it came suddenly, the request came suddenly. My mother couldn't deal with it, my father couldn't deal with it. And then my mom said, wait. And she went out. And she came back with that money. So it tells me that there were some people in the community who were also going beyond moral support and were making financial contributions to education. And that touched me, because that told me that I needed to make sure that I give something back to education. That was a spurt for my community involvement. And ever since then, I've been involved in community work, because I said, I have to make my contribution. If persons are willing to make that level of investment, then they need to be able to give something back. So I've been doing that. I've been doing that all the time. You know, when I think about the value in education, I live in a I grew up in a cul-de-sac called Breadfruit Alley, and I suspect that the name was given because of the number of breadfruit trees around the area. And there are 3 houses in that community that out of those 3 houses, you have 5 persons with doctorates. You had Dr. Noel Prophet, you had the late Dr. Kenmore and Dr. Granty. And then in the other house, you had Dr. Joseph Cummins, and then in the other house, you had Dr. Janice Jules. Those 3 houses, 5 people with doctorates, because they were motivated to understand the importance of education as a liberator in terms of thought, in terms of approach to life, etc. And that was particularly important to them. And unfortunately, when we look at contemporary society, this is always made great known, that we're seeing very little of that being reflected, that we're seeing persons who are trying as much as possible to get out of school as quickly as they can. They don't seem to understand that education is the key to significant development. Right? But when you look at my community, I also think about sports. The fact that at one time in this area, you had 5 viable, well-organized, well-functioning cricket clubs in this small area. And when we think about that, we have to say thanks to certain individuals, Boxer, Darcy Hunt, both of those are deceased, and then Neville Watson, who emigrated to America, and then Kenneth Springer, who is still a resident in this area. Those are the persons that I can remember offhand who put in that effort in order to make sure that cricket was kept alive in this community. But the interesting thing is that in each club, you have certain mentors, people who would look at the younger players, and if, for example, they could not afford to buy cricket gear, they would give them that cricket, donate that cricket gear. They will work with them, they will strengthen them, etc. And my biggest problem, again, I come back to the the contrast between traditional and contemporary society. My gripe is now that there is no cricket being played in this area. Matter of fact, there's minimal sports. There are two individuals who are trying to resurrect football, but largely the interest that we had in sports, that traditional, is no longer there. That's a major concern of mine. Because as I look back at my community, I can remember when we had what was called Easter Fest. We would take the community and divide it into areas, and we had an athletic meeting. So we would go to farmers' playing field and we would have an athletic meeting. And the interesting thing was that Easter Fest was sponsored by the businesses in the community. So they gave the money so that we could present these. And then at the end, we had this grand thing where we came together, food was provided, etc. Then we had the Hillbillies, and interesting enough is out of that Easter Fest that we realized how fast Ryan Bradford was. Because he lives just across the air from here. We recognized how fast he was. We saw his talent coming out there, and that talent bloomed and developed. And then we had the Hillbilly Sports Championships where we again, the area was divided, and you had contests and things like dominoes, cricket, etc., etc. That was a major part of our development.
Before you go, can you list the names of the cricket clubs?
Memory fades me, but I remember there's one called Somerset, right? And then the other, because they were named after clubs usually in England, all right? So that was important because, you know, the whole idea was this connection, because it seemed to think that England was the place where cricket originated, so therefore it's a place that should be given held in high esteem. And then in terms of community development, that's another area that I'm particularly concerned about, because looking back, I remember the time when we had the Hillbilly Social and Cultural Youth Group in this community. And we used to do a number of community projects. We went on overseas trips of Trinidad, twice, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, etc. And there was significant work that was done. But what has come home to me is that community development requires work. It requires interest, it requires commitment. And that seems to be sadly lacking now, because as we look at our community, we're not having that. And so as an individual family, we are trying to do a list and we see if we could get things going in the right direction. My sister died in 2021. And we decided as a family that we will see if we launch 2 special projects in the community in order to see if we can re-stimulate the interest. So we have what is called the Ayanti Community Spirit Award. And the person the awardee receives a trophy and $1,000 in cash. So far we've had 2 persons receiving, Izzy Braffett and Nicholas Gibbs. And then the other thing we're trying to launch is the Ayanti Allen Culinary Competition, where, because again, we're trying to stimulate interest in traditional dishes, the sweet bread, the conky, etc., etc. So we're trying to get that launched, and the grand prize will be the total prize will be $1,000 to be distributed among 3 persons. All right, so we're trying at individual level. We're hoping that perhaps we would like to spark. And out of that spark, people will decide that they want to be involved once again in the community, because community is about us. It's about each person playing a part, each person playing a role. And when you have a high level of selfishness coming in, that's where a lot of the community spirit dies. And then when you exacerbate that with drugs seeping in, that is another difficulty that you have to confront when you're thinking in terms of community. Now, church. I mentioned the Hillbilly Seventh Adventist Church and its contribution to education, but church was also a major thing in this community. You have the Christian Mission, you have the Nazarene, you have the Hillbilly Seventh Adventist Church, and then you have the offshoots. My major concern is that a lot of those churches now are not touching the community in terms of the moral tone, etc., that you would expect. They largely tend to confine themselves to social welfare programs, so they provide for the needy, etc. But I'm seeing in this community a drift. A lot of young people, both male and female, who are drifting away from morals, so seem to have little idea of what they want to do with their lives, etc. And I'm saying to myself that this is a gap that you would expect the church to be able to fill, the churches to be able to fill, because they're about 8, 9, 10 in this community. But unfortunately, they're withdrawing themselves more and more from engagement. And that is my major concern with respect to the whole idea of church. For example, the Hillbilly Seventh Adventist Church, they have monthly health checks, because apparently a survey was done and the persons in the area said that they wanted health checks. So every month they bring a nurse and they do cholesterol, they do blood sugar, they do blood pressure. The Nazarene Church has a dance group, right? And that is what they spend a lot of time doing. So the other churches have activity in terms of music, etc. But in terms of programs that in fact will embrace and incorporate community outside of the church, that perhaps is where they're lacking. There are enough programs in the church for quote unquote the members. But if you think in terms of programs now that will go outside the community and interact, particularly young people here, that is where we seem to be falling down. And I don't suppose I can blame them, because it is not easy to do that, because you have to look for creative ways. And generally, church thinking tends to be traditional. All right. So if you're thinking in terms of creative way to interact with a person, for example, who's smoking, a girl, for example, who has 3-4 children for different fathers, how do you get that person to understand that the church can bring relief, the church can bring guidance, the church can help them to see a better way? How do you connect with them? And that is where the problem comes. All right? And I think that's where you find that a lot of the activities tend to be inter-church, within the church for its members. Right? Of course, there's a normal Easter thing, Easter program, and the Christmas program, but that is largely, again, for church members who might invite friends to come in. But it's not presented in such a way that you're taking in terms of outside. Right? And that is really major. That's where the problem is. The traditional festivities tend to be around Christmas. Right? Tuck band. We had a tuck band. People like Medford, who was up the hill there, right? They would come, and they would go through the area, they would play the music and make the requests, etc., right? And that was a major thing, because I think it came off of a landship group that was in St. Joseph. And then when those persons at Medford came down to Hillaby to live, they brought it with them. Right? I remember 2 people, Medford and George, they were part of that. Right? George, the flute master, who was a kitten, and they would go on mornings. It is gone. It is gone, sadly. Right? Because I don't think that people appreciate the significance of it in terms of an indigenous activity. Right? They're unfortunately largely thought in terms of men who are coming around looking for rum. Right? So they don't understand that. Yes, that was part of it too, but there was a way of doing it, that it was done with grace and finesse. All right? As opposed to just begging, blatant begging. All right? So they missed that. Right? And when those 2 persons died, it went with them.
Embracing the diversity within the community and respecting the various backgrounds and perspectives of its residents are significant aspects of community life. What about characters?
There are some characters, as you know, there are always some community characters that I want to draw your attention to. I know they're interested, in the interest of time, let me just stay with 3, right? There's a young man who was Peter Clark. He's deceased now. He was an industrious young man at one point. He had acquired property, he had built a house, and he was thinking in terms of marrying. But then his girlfriend was unfaithful. And that threw his whole life into a spin. He became a community menace. So that he would target churches, so he would go in churches, and when the person got up to preach, he would start preaching his own sermon. Right? And he would interrupt them, etc. There was one story, I don't know if it's true, where in fact one day he took a dog into the church, and you know that what that led to. All right, and that's a sad demise. But and then sometimes he would target me, for example. He would come at my kitchen door and lie down, talk and mutter to himself and talk, and then neighbors would pass and say, "Well, you don't leave go for a run on my property, Joey, don't throw water on it, etc., etc." All right, but eventually he will go along. I remember one night, it was getting dark and my wife was in the kitchen. And he crept into the kitchen with a boom. And my wife nearly ignored everything in the kitchen. All right? And he was there bending over with laughter. And when she understood what was happening and ran to me, ran down the driveway laughing. He was that kind of person. All right? That kind of person. Then the other person I want to draw attention to is Mortar Small. He was the best batsman in this area. But the interesting thing was that he could only produce his finest when he was tipsy. Right? And I remember a Sunday afternoon, we got farmers playing this match. And he was there. And it was his turn to bat. He had to virtually wake him up and tell him it was his turn to bat. And they saw him stumbling, going out. And I asked myself, why is Mortar going out there? What does he expect to do? But the bowler, I think, was my brother-in-law. Winston, if it's not you, excuse me, but my brother-in-law. And he was a nippy-paced bowler. And he came in, delivered, and all we hear was cocks. That ball hit that bat and moved like a shot. Like it burned the grass. Because Morton never used to hit balls through the air. It was always along the ground like Everton Weeks. Right? And that shot was talked about for years. People did somersaults, they ran on the pitch, they lifted him up, etc. Because we could not imagine that a man who was tipsy could play a shot like that. But there are countless stories of him playing shots like that, particularly when he's tipsy. Right? That is when it's shone. And then the last one I want to draw to your attention to is a different generation, man named Packer. We could never quite understand his source of income, where he was able to generate these funds. But he was a very strategic thinker. And so he knew when there was back pay, he knew when there was bonuses, he knew when there was people who got the weekly paychecks. And what he would do is that he would always encourage the fellas to come by him, and he would cook for them, etc., etc. And while they were there, of course, a game would start out, a game of chance. And you know who eventually would profit from that. So that most of the times the fellas would leave, pockets empty, his full. And that was how we did it. And so we used to call him Sweet Mouth Packer. Because he would always be able to generate that kind of thing and create problems for them. All right? But generally, I'm saying that life in Hillaby, even though there's going through changes, even though like every society we're seeing the erosion of what I call traditional values, nevertheless, there are some good people in this community. There's some good people who work together, who encourage you, who support you. All right? There's some people who see themselves as committed to living here. They will tell you they will go nowhere else, because this is where they want to make their mark.
Well, a man's love for his community encompasses a broad spectrum of actions and attitudes that reflect his dedication to making the community a better place for everyone. It is a driving force that empowers positive change, fostering unity, and it contributes to the overall well-being and prosperity of the place he holds dearly to his heart. We thank you, sir, for sharing your memories and presenting your 70th birthday gift to the people of Barbados and the Barbadian diaspora. This has been My Community. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, take good care of yourselves and look out for the interests of your neighbors.